Welcome to another episode of Sustainable Goat. I'm Steve Cassingham, and I interview the greatest of all time in sustainability from the past, present, and into the future. In this episode, I talk with Brian Linton, founder and CEO of United by Blue. If you haven't heard of United by Blue, it was born out of a need to create a more sustainable clothing solution, one that isn't damaging to the planet and also made to last. But this was about 10 years ago. And what began as a clothing brand has turned into the go-to spot for purchasing anything sustainable. They are truly a marketplace that you can trust. So let's dive into the conversation with Brian. Thanks for being a part of this podcast. I'm really excited for it. I've been a fan of United by Blue for years now. It's kind of one of those things where people I think are now starting to hear a little bit more about your brand and kind of what you guys stand for, because I think in the retail space there's so much, I guess, separation between, what's sustainable, what's not, what's greenwashed, what's not. And I think you guys bring just like such a fresh perspective to it. So I'd love to just start with a little bit of your story and just where you kind of came up, why clothing originally, why retail, and why United by Blue. I know you had a little bit of you had kind of a startup company that became United by Blue, but I'd love to hear a little bit about your story and your background, where you're originally from, stuff like that.
Yeah, cool. So my background starts with, as many entrepreneurs, my childhood, and I grew up predominantly in Southeast Asia, Singapore. And so because I grew up in Singapore, Singapore is, although it's known for high tech and crazy rich Asians and things like that, it's actually also got a tropical fish scene that's quite robust and also sophisticated in terms of like there's a lot of hobbyists that are raising various forms of tropical fish, some of them very high end. I remember in my upbringing, you go to a fish store in Singapore. It's not like going to Petco here or PetSmart and seeing like a dollar guppy. It's you go and you see like a $88,000 like fish. Oh yeah, it's crazy. And this is back 20 years ago. I remember seeing some fish for that.
Wait, how did that all happen? Like why is that such an important part of the culture? Is it just that the tropical fish are there and there's a market for it, or?
It's interesting. There's an actual like large fish farm scene totally behind the scenes in Singapore. So you go to Singapore, you see, Marina Bay Sands, the big hotels, the casino, like the Louis Vuitton, all the high end, Singapore is the most wealthy country in the world, highest per capita of millionaires live in Singapore than anywhere else. And even more so now that people are leaving places like Hong Kong and other areas of the world and going into Singapore. Anyways, but then there's this like you go into the back roads of Singapore, which there are few back roads because it's the island is like 30 miles or so long. That's the country. But then there's this area that is known for fish breeding, and I used to find it so fascinating as a child. I would go to it was literally called Fish Farm Road. And Fish Farm Road would be, where you could go and you could see all the fish farms that were breeding fish that were going to be traded across the world. Usually the higher end fish, not all $88,000 fish, but like, a lot of things that were basically going to, be in, be in fish stores like around the world. Largely like the more expensive fish that I had and that were really a big part of culture there was something called an arowana, Asian arowana. Arowana is it's like a long skinny fish with two little barbs, and they can be really expensive. And you even have microchips in them to trace their origin back to their fish farm and everything like that. Anyways, long story short is that the reason why I think fish, not just the economic driver of having the industry of fish farming, but also the culture around fish and luck and prosperity and things like that is a big cultural cornerstone of, say, Chinese culture, which about 70 plus percent of Singaporeans are of Chinese heritage. And so, if you go to like a doctor's office, or you go to like a lawyer's office, or you go to any home, there might be a fish that is either something that is a certain color, maybe it has certain markings. There's a lot of like superstition around, like even like the luck of like this one fish that was really popular when I was a teenager, called the flower horn, or in Singapore we call it the rohan. And so the rohan would have like this big fat forehead, and then it would have all these markings along the side of the body. And I remember the fish shop owners that I would go and visit almost daily would always try to see numbers in the side and then bet those numbers in the lottery.
Oh my God.
Things like that, I think, just were very like, there's more to it than just like, oh, that's a beautiful fish. There was a lot of, again, like I said, there was a lot of like this idea of prosperity and luck and wealth that was behind what a fish could symbolize. And so I think, and that's not necessarily where my interests lay. Where I was really interested in fish was, I thought fish are amazing. I was always into fish even prior to getting into raising fish, but I was also really into, the business side of like, hey, I can breed a fish, and then I can create all these babies, and then I can bring them back to the fish store, and I can barter with them. And so I was really into like I had 30 fish tanks in my bedroom growing up. So I was like,
God, no way.
yeah. So I was really into fish. I have 0 fish tanks now. I actually have a 1 fish tank in my upstairs that is empty. It's not it's an empty fish tank that just glares at me and reminds me of my past fish days. But anyways, long story short is that when you're dealing with fish like this, and it's not just a fish tank with a few dollars worth of guppies in it, I took water quality very seriously. And I took like, what does the water need of this fish, and all fish have slightly different needs, and the different temperatures, the different acidities, the different balance of vegetation. And so although this wasn't necessarily something that I realized at the time, looking back, the raising of these tropical fish, and I had, I didn't have any super expensive fish. The most expensive fish that I had was when I left Singapore. I sold it for like $1,000, which was like phenomenal. Like that was like a huge thing for me. Whoever really has $1,000 living fish, right? I mean, like that's sort of crazy. But like, so when you have $1,000 fish in your high school bedroom, and you want to keep it alive, and so the water quality was the core element of that. And so when I came to the States and I started looking around, at say the water bodies or the rivers that were running through Philadelphia or New York City, you start to realize that in nature, we treat the water so poorly, and there's so much trash in that water. I would never have trash in my fish tanks, right? I would never want to have my fish interact with that or have any health concerns because of that. So it's just a microcosm of this larger ecosystem issue that we have with the world, where it's like, okay, same thing as like any natural environment that we try to recreate in isolation or away from nature. Would we put toxins? Would we put plastics? No, we wouldn't do any of that. And we're in trying to create a natural habitat. But then in the actual natural world, we pollute the crap out of it. So that was sort of the juxtaposition of what I saw in the natural world versus what I knew to be right and wrong, which doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure that out. But it was shocking to me when I came to the States, because America, I always perceived as, super first world. And at least my experience with it, as an American growing up overseas, I always, envisioned the beauty of the country and like the Rocky Mountains, out in Boulder, and then when I came to live in an actual city in America, I realized just how pervasive the issues of plastic pollution are. They're not just in Indonesia, Vietnam, China, India. They are in first world countries like the US as well. And so I wanted to start a business that would really tap into my passion for the outdoors and the natural world, but also address some of the issues that I saw as some of the more pressing issues of our time, and one of those being uh, plastic pollution and trash getting into our oceans.
Wow, that is such an interesting story of how you got into it. Something that honestly I don't think anybody would ever see coming at all. But also you're addressing a problem that I think has gotten a lot more popularity over the years. But it's been an issue for a long time. I mean, growing up next to the beach. I mean, I remember I was probably like 19 or something, and I was surfing, and there was literally just we're in the lineup, and there's just trash everywhere. And you're like, this is a beautiful place, and there's trash, floating in the water next to you. And it's really just sad at the end of the day. And the solutions around it, I think, are getting better, but it's more of an awareness thing that I think people haven't thought about. What happens when you throw away your trash or don't throw it away.
Exactly. And you nailed it. Like, it's been an issue for a while. And I think that in the last 10 years, even since starting United by Blue in 2010, I remember starting in 2010, and the level of awareness for plastics and plastic pollution in the ocean was very, very low. It seems so recently, but so much has happened in the last 10 years. That is very encouraging. I mean, the notion that, there's places where, straws are now banned or considered evil, or plastic bags. None of that was on the topic of conversation in 2010. And the notion that you would go out on a weekend with your friends to do a beach cleanup, or pick up trash as well, all of these things have become more of like a normal thing in culture versus an oddity. And I think that is very encouraging. But it does, to your point, it does have a long way to go. And the culture of disposable and single-use plastics is the core element of that. It's not so much the people's behavior after the fact, because the amount of trash that actually people purposely try to put into the oceans and waterways is not the issue. It's really just the creation of it in the first place, and then how pervasive it is, and therefore how it gets in. 80%, just as an example, 80% of trash that gets into the ocean starts on land. Whether or not that's blown out of a trash bin and then goes into a gutter, even if it starts in Boulder, Colorado, it could ultimately make it into the ocean, because everything's united by blue. Everything's united by the waterways.
Yeah. So when you decided you were going to start this brand, I mean, one, I can tell where the name came from for sure. But what was kind of your initial mindset when you were starting the company? I mean, in an area that I think now it's easier to start a company that has that thread through the company, but you were starting at a time where it wasn't really talked about. So what was that kind of struggle for you to overcome that, not only the education of the consumer, but also getting traction as a company? And where did you kind of start? What was your initial, product focus? What was the inception, I guess?
The the product inception was very basic, and something that I think a lot of people have started with, and I wouldn't recommend it, but t-shirts. So I started in 2010 with 4 t-shirts, and really at the beginning, it wasn't so much about the t-shirts. It was about, even more so, about the mission and the message than the product. I would say that now we've found a perfect balance between making amazing product that people probably like with or without the mission. Although it will never be separate from the mission. It's important to have great product. At the beginning, it was really about this strong message around conservation and what we were aspiring to do for the world. And the only reason why I think it worked is the market that we sold to initially was the outdoor industry. And so outdoor shops that were already very in tune with the natural world and wanted to really tell a story around conservation through a product. I don't think that, say, traditional fashion or traditional stores were ready in the same way for that type of message as the outdoor industry was. And so the first 100 stores that I sold to were probably exclusively outdoor oriented stores that were selling brands like Patagonia, for instance, or Prana. So really compatible with that message, but complementary in a sense that it was telling a different story of conservation. that people really resonated with. And so for the first 5, 6 years, we really were an outdoor brand. We were very focused on sort of the love of the outdoors and the protection of it. That sense, along with the culture of conservation, sort of getting more intertwined into normal day life, we've evolved more into a sustainable living brand, which to me is more exciting because sustainability and the outdoors are synonymous with one another and will always be focused on the love of the outdoors. So the thread of being an outdoor brand is still there, but the actual best way to have maximum impact as well as maximum growth is to be inclusive and really looking at the world holistically and not just as a singular sort of segment of the population, which is, the outdoor, quote unquote, outdoor industry. Although maybe that's, in certain markets like where you live, it might be 98% of the population.
Mm-hmm.
The reality is the rest of the world is not like that, right? So
Mm-hmm.
we're really trying to create a brand that's inclusive of all walks of life that want to be sustainable and want to live a sustainable life. So United by Blue now is a sustainable living brand that can sell United by Blue branded products. So, a United by Blue t-shirt or United by Blue, sweatshirt or pants or hat or whatever, but also best in class sustainability products from other brands. We sell over 50 brands that are brands that we believe in. And so United by Blue in that way has become sort of a trusted source in sustainability. So, if we sell something, we know that it's something that is better for the world. And that's an important part of our sort of ultimate goal as well, is to be the go-to destination for sustainable living.
Yeah, yeah, and I love that you mentioned that, because that's honestly one of the reasons why I've always come back to United by Blue is that, when you're researching brands, I mean, nowadays almost every brand is saying in some way, shape, or form they have a product line that is quote unquote sustainable, but you're not necessarily looking at the whole loop of what they're creating. And it's almost like you can just go to United by Blue and you're like, cool, I trust this place. Because everything here has been vetted. There's a deep thread of what you guys believe through every single product. What was that decision that you guys made to kind of start offering other products? Like, was there a point where you're like, man, maybe we should pivot a little bit, or has it always been part of the vision?
No, I think that vision started to develop a few years ago. We had complementary products that we were selling probably as long as 5, 6 years ago, but I would say give or take 3 years ago, we started to really have a concerted effort to build out the portfolio of brands that we believed in, that we wanted to bring into our physical stores that we operate in Philadelphia now, one in Chicago, and that's going to be an important part of our growth is physical stores, so people can interact with the products in person, but then also on our website. And COVID really accelerated that, because COVID gave us an opportunity to sort of relook at our business, like I think a lot of people had a chance to do. And when we were, sitting there at the beginning of COVID, looking at who we are, and what we stand for and where we want to go, it was clear to me that the concept for United by Blue is so much bigger than United by Blue products that we design and make. And it was this idea of community and the idea of building the sustainability community that we've always been advocates for. We've always been, I think, a driving force for, even though we're not the biggest sustainable brand, we've almost had an outsized sort of approach to collaboration and bringing people together. And a good example of this is at the beginning of COVID as well, we started this alliance called the Mission Brand Alliance. And the Mission Brand Alliance was this consortium of brands that we brought together in the sustainability space to basically co-market to our customers, knowing that there was a lot of uncertainty in the world. And we wanted to basically, reinforce the need for sustainable brands and mission-driven brands. And so the Mission Brand Alliance was basically 30 brands, and is 30 brands that came together to basically collaborate over compete. And the notion that we're stronger together than apart is something that really resonated with the brands, but also the customers. And it drove tremendous sales for the brands that were a part of it last year. A good example of that is that we sent out a catalog at the end of last year to all of our best customers to introduce my best customers to your best customers and their best customers, and it was the most productive catalog that we've ever seen, because lo and behold, if you love United by Blue, you're probably going to love another Mission brand that you may not have heard of, because a lot of them are, hard to find and hard to understand, or hard to discover if you're not actively looking for them. And so this notion of collaboration is also symbolic in how we approach our retail business, and the idea that we want to bring people together and we want to introduce our customers to the best brands is something that I believe in. And I think that we're uniquely positioned to be this sustainability marketplace, because we have a sort of, I wouldn't say agnostic, but somewhat agnostic approach to the products that we're known for. United by Blue is not like a single direct to consumer category brand that is known for one individual thing. We're known for this notion of sustainability and conservation. And so we can sell a refurbished high-end rug from Revival, for instance. Revival, they find beautiful Moroccan rugs that need to be restored, and then they resell them. And so we can sell an $1,800 rug, but we can also sell a $10 stasher silicone bag, and then we can also sell a $20 ceramic mug from United by Blue that you see in Whole Foods as well. And so this idea that people can shop across so much categories is, I think, a unique thing with United by Blue.
That's really, really cool. And for the consumers that are really trying to enter the market, because you have I would imagine from your end, you guys kind of get probably a little bit more of the data, but that market has been growing like crazy, because the outdoor industry, for one, has been growing exponentially year on year, just because people are now enjoying the outdoors. COVID, I'm sure, accelerated that a little bit, but you also have a lot more focus on sustainability. So I would imagine there's a lot of newcomers to the market that are searching for solutions that not only that they can trust, but also provides kind of a central location for all their needs. I mean, you mentioned a mug, and then being able to have a Moroccan rug, and you can put that in your home and then drink out of the mug. Like it's kind of creating a holistic vision of that lifestyle. And I think that that's a really smart move. Was it hard to kind of, when all the brands came together, is it kind of an uphill battle? Because I mean, I would imagine in terms of like marketing spend and trying to grow brands, you're fighting against some huge companies that have bigger budgets, bigger customer base, and you're kind of, that whole banding together idea, was that kind of like a, hey, we're all in this together, because this mission is so much more important than all of us individually, that the market just needs to be more aware around it. Was that kind of the mindset around it?
It is, and I think that maybe that's the mindset around something like Mission Brand Alliance, which are brands that are co-marketing and not necessarily brands that we all sell. I think that the brands that we sell on our website and in our stores, that is a little bit more transactional. Like we are buying from brands and selling products that we believe in. I think that the idea that we can build deeper relationships with these brands because of who we are and sort of the message that we want to tell is I think important, because there is so much, brands like United by Blue right now, as well as other sustainable brands, are in demand, and retailers and websites and everything like that are looking for stories to tell their customers, just like we're looking for stories to tell our customers. But I think that the partnerships that you form within this retail community go much, they need to go deeper than just the initial transaction. They need to go to a level of representation of like your beliefs. And so I think what we do when we partner with a brand is that we, in many ways, we amplify and build their brand in a positive way because of who we are, and likewise it's who they are help build us. So like it is retail is transactional from a dollars and cents standpoint, but then it goes much deeper than that when it's done right. And I think that when retailers just try to buy and sell something and not build anything else around that, that's like traditional retail, and that's bound to fail in the long run. And so that's sort of my perspective on when we buy something, if we're just buying it to sell it and not do anything else around that, not tell the story, not try to curate and really build that sort of storyline around a sustainable lifestyle and how you can integrate this into your sustainable lifestyle, then we're just becoming a dinosaur.
Yep, definitely. And one of the things that I found so interesting, just diving through, your expansion over time has been the materials. I've always been fascinated with supply chain and material science and how that can kind of transform how we make everyday things. Because a cup is a cup, and we'll probably always need cups. But if you can make that cup out of something else, that can have a bigger impact. And that's just one example. So you guys have a ton of materials on your site and a lot of transparency around it. Has that been exciting for you to explore as well? And why so many materials?
Yeah, I mean, at the core of sustainability is what you make things of. We can have a great mission and pick up trash and support our conservation cause, but if we're making crap and we're making stuff that's either made from unsustainable materials or made in unsustainable ways, then nothing else really matters. And also, like, the quality of what you make is paramount, because if you're buying something and using it once and then throwing it away, that's not sustainable, even if it's made from sustainable material. So when we look at materials and we look at our supply chain, we do use a number of things that are conventional sustainable materials. And I say conventional in that, something like organic cotton or recycled polyester is really conventional now from a sustainability standpoint. When I started 12 years ago, it wasn't. Like, organic cotton, recycled polyester was actually, believe it or not, like a selling point for sustainability. I think it's like, that's par for the course now. If it's a shirt and it's like, like you don't really like get much credit for being organic, although it's important still. And I think there's plenty of conventional cotton still out there. It's not necessarily like a unique factor, but to push sustainability forward, I've always believed that, because of my experience now, 15 years in the industry, sustainability is not a status quo. It doesn't exist today the same way that it exists in 10 years. And that example of organic cotton is the perfect example, because although that was, best in class sustainability 10 years, now it's par for the course. And so same thing goes for anything else that you're using now. It's like, how do you push sustainability forward as a brand and not just accept it for what it is today and say, oh, this is sustainable because this is what's readily available and this is what people are saying is sustainable. I think as a brand, you always have to be questioning, because even at our size, you have power in creating the demand for what is next. And so sustainability has to be driven by the brand's decision to pioneer something new and maybe take a chance on something new, because the consumer might create some halo demand, but the brand decision to actually use a material is what's actually going to drive the demand in the supply chains. And so one of the things that we've done from an innovation standpoint is, we've tried to look a lot more at the natural fiber world and say, hey, if it's a natural fiber and it exists in this world in a natural state, that is going to be the most sustainable form of textile that you can make. Anything synthetic has an innate challenge with sustainability. Recycled polyester is a great example. Great, we're recycling water bottles. We use a lot of it, don't get me wrong. But it sort of bugs me because it's not the most sustainable option for us, right? It's got a whole bunch of issues with the fact that it's plastic to start with, the fact that it sheds if you wash garments that have recycled polyester, and that those microplastics get in the ocean and things like that. We try to use it on materials that, like a bag, for instance, that needs durability and isn't going to go in the washing machine all the time, if at all. So that's probably a better use for it. But like, yeah, when it's in like a fleece or anything like that, it's causing a whole bunch of issues. So natural fibers are a big focus of ours, and bison fiber was something that we pioneered a number of years ago that has really become an interesting part of our product line, because we make these amazing socks out of it. We make all of our jacket insulation, anything that's an insulated jacket is made from a bison shield insulation, which is our proprietary bison fiber and wool insulation. So if you think about a bison, you see a picture of it in like Yellowstone covered in snow in the wintertime, happy as can be. It's because of their fiber. It's because of this beautiful, beautiful fiber. And there's a growing industry of bison ranches in America, which are actually, as much as the livestock industry is not a sustainable industry, the alternative to traditional cattle versus bison is naght and day. Bison are native species to the grasslands of North America, so they help restore the native plants and the native ecosystems and biodiversity. They are much more of a natural species in terms of how they're raised and how they eat and how they consume, and they ultimately are a lot more sustainable and healthier than, say, traditional livestock. So if you're a meat eater and you have the choice between eating like traditional cattle or bison is always the better choice. But in that process of raising these bison, the fiber wasn't being utilized. It was being discarded, wasted. So we basically found that as a natural fiber opportunity to harvest it and use it in our products. And so since we started Bison Shield several years ago, we haven't used any synthetic insulations. We haven't used any down products, which have innate sustainability problems as well sometimes. So all of our insulation in all of our jackets is from the bison fiber that we harvest that is going to get wasted anyways.
So what was that conversation like of thinking about bison fiber? I mean, how did you come across it? Because brilliant for one. So that's absolutely awesome. But how did you really find that subject? Because to almost invent a new material, if you will, or a new product material to be able to put in a supply chain, like that takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of innovation, probably a lot of testing. What was that roadmap for you guys, and how did you kind of start that process?
It started with the realization that there was an opportunity to explore the natural fiber world, and that came from probably it was a while ago, but we were using wool, so traditional wool in our socks, and socks were starting to perform really well for us as a business. And I started just contemplating, as I do, about the material that we were using, and it's like, if wool is such an amazing material, what makes a sheep special, right? Like, why is a sheep the only natural fiber that we should be exploring? And I didn't really actually have confidence that I even knew where how that sheep was raised, where it was raised, how it was harvested. So I started thinking about, okay, this is a natural fiber and it's working really well, both from a performance and from a sales standpoint, but I don't really know much about it. So then I started to think about other species that were sort of part of smaller industries and maybe a little bit easier to sort of wrap my head around. And you look at alpaca, you look at llama, you look at all these different animals that have like these little cute little farms all across the world, and they're known for being really beautiful materials, but they're all very niche and novelty. And then you broaden your search and you start to see, okay, and then the bison. And then so I started thinking about bison because of that sort of curiosity around other natural fibers beyond wool. And when I got my first little handful of bison fiber from a friend who was out in Montana, who lives in Montana, and he sent me some bison fiber because I was interested in it, and it was like cashmere. It's like this like amazing animal that's almost looks like a tank. You wouldn't think it's such a beautiful, delicate material. And so the undercoat of the bison, maybe not the outer coat, but the undercoat is comparable to cashmere. And when I saw that, I was like, oh my gosh, we got to figure out how to do something with this. And so that began the process to make the first product, which was a sock. And then the sock was only using the undercoat of the bison, and all of the coarse fiber. So anything secondary beyond the undercoat. So there's generally 3 or 4 grades of fiber that you can take from a bison coat. It's not like a sheep, which is fairly consistent in its consistency throughout the coat. There's actually like layers of fiber. So like a dog, if you think about how a dog has an outer coat, and then that, like if you've ever seen a dog shed, that stuff that comes out, that's the down. That's like super soft. And you can do the same. I mean, you could do this with like a dog. Like you could take that undercoat as it sheds, and you can make yarn out of that. And some people do. It's not very scalable, I don't think. But but what true sustainability is using everything. And so when we started to only use the undercoat, and then I was stockpiling all of a sudden because we were shearing these bison, and then we had all this extra fiber that wasn't able to go into socks because anything coarse would be itchy. Mm-hmm. I realized that we had to find a way to use that in a way that didn't touch the skin. And that's where Bison Shield insulation came from, because all of a sudden we were able to bond that with wool and create these really beautiful sheets of insulation that could then go into a shell, into the jacket shell, and provide exceptional warmth and comfort and not touch the skin.
Wow. So from a manufacturing standpoint, what was that process like? Because when you talked about shearing, I mean, you can shear, sheep, and it's consistent. So you just kind of do it, toss it in, make it into a fiber. Was that different going through the layers? Like, was that extra steps in the process that you guys had to do in order to innovate how to make it into a fiber? Or like, was it from the shearing process, the separation after the shearing?
It's called a deherring process. So like what you do is you shear a bison, then you take all of that fiber is mixed together. It goes and gets scoured, which is just a technical term for washing it. So you scour the fiber, you get all the junk out, and then you take that scoured, that clean fiber, and you go to a deherring process. And a deherring machine, like an industrial one, is massive. They're like 50 feet long, and they have these rollers, these combs that basically the fiber goes through, and the different grades of fiber drop out at certain points of this deherring process. And the only fiber that makes it to the very end of the machine is the finest micron count, which is going to be your down, your cashmere, essentially. So the C, B, A, and then prime is what it's called. So C is like the coarsest fiber that has like the thicker black hairs and like a little bit like what you would use for like you can make rope out of it, and like it's hard to use that material for anything nice. But then the B and the A is what we use for our insulation. So it's not fine enough to put into a yarn. So like my socks here are bison, and this is like the cashmere, the prime goes into this. But then B and A is what is like in a jacket insulation. And so it's this machine that basically separates out the different grades of fiber. And it runs really slow. And it's like, it takes a long time to basically, from shearing a bison to actually making a product. It is a long process. And it's something that is all currently for us, like our socks, fully domestic supply chain. Canadian, we actually share our bison in Canada. We scour it in Canada, then we dehair it in the US, and then we produce our socks in the US as well.
That's awesome. And I love that you dove into that process a little bit, just because, I thankfully have had the opportunity to go into some factories where that kind of stuff is going. There's a denim manufacturer in Phoenix that basically they take denim. So when you donate your stuff to H&M, or they work specifically with the cotton brand, all the blue jeans to green initiative, essentially, they just get truckloads of jeans, and very similar process. They're separating the fibers of those jeans into material, and then they make insulation out of it for homes, goes to Habitat for Humanity, goes into cars, and then they're able to take the brass out of that and then repurpose that as well. And so that machine that you were talking about, I totally know what you mean. It's just finer and finer as it goes through, and it slowly just separates it. It's fascinating, but I don't think a lot of people get that opportunity to kind of know what that process looks like. So I'm grateful you kind of jumped into that a little bit. So in terms of the future of United by Blue, I mean, what are kind of your plans? Because I was imagining this is, this is part of a much bigger process that you're slowly building towards. Because obviously you've been doing this for 10 years, and I think the growth and the thoughtfulness that you guys have had as a brand has been massive. Where are you kind of seeing the brand starting to go in the future in the next few years?
We're only touching the tip of the iceberg when it comes to giving people the products to live a sustainable lifestyle. And I think that as we broaden our product assortment and we offer people more products to offer to live a sustainable life, that's sort of the core element of where United by Blue is going, is to be your go-to destination for those best in class sustainability products. And then from an actual sort of distribution standpoint, we really do believe that we need to be increasing our physical footprint to really introduce more people to this, so that online is great. Direct to consumer sales online are a core element of today's modern economy, but in many ways it is still limiting, because unless you're a consumer that is going to our website at unitedbyblue.com, there's not as much discovery opportunity as when you have a physical presence of say stores. So we're really focused on opening stores across the country. So we'll be opening United by Blue stores over the next few years to try to grow our physical footprint, both to obviously grow our sales, but also to grow the ability for us to have physical presence to coordinate all of our cleanups from. So physical stores become the hub for our conservation activities. That is a huge part of the brand. It's like, if we have a physical presence, if we have a physical store presence, we have the ability to have a physical conservation presence. And we've done that historically through our wholesale distribution. So anywhere we've had wholesale retailers, we've also tried to do cleanups with them in conjunction with them. But that's limited because ultimately they're not ours. And so we can only do that to a certain extent. But in Philadelphia, for instance, pre-COVID, we would have regular cleanups of rivers here in Philadelphia, where we would draw 300 people out, the snap of a finger, and we'd be able to pick up 2,000 pounds of trash out of the Delaware or Schuylkill River on a Saturday without really too much effort, because we have this community. So we want to build community throughout different markets in the U.S. as well as abroad, and utilizing our retail distribution as a way to fund that as well. So the funding of the physical store in a way generates the community, but also generates the profit and the sales to have an outsized impact. So I'd say that sort of the combination of product assortment being broad enough to help people live a more sustainable life and encourage sustainability in everybody's life, and then the physical aspect of retail expansion to drive our community involvement as well.
I really like that, and it's funny you kind of talk a lot about retail, and everybody's been talking about the death of retail, right? They're kind of like, oh well, it's over, and it's more just it's shifting. What can a retail space be, rather than just a place for someone to come, walk in, buy something, walk out. It's becoming a community hub for brands that actually have a bigger mission. And I love that you touched on that, because that is the transformation of retail. It's not that retail is going to go away. People still want to go in person, especially when it comes to trying on a jacket or anything that they're actually going to be wearing day to day. There's a physical aspect to it. And if you're just shipping stuff and returning it and doing that whole thing, you have that impact of all the shipping involved of, sending something to someone to test it and then send it back. So yeah, I think retail's a huge play. What's kind of your favorite part of this whole process, of your 11 years of running United by Blue? What's been your favorite part of the process along the way?
It's a good question. I think my favorite part of the process of United by Blue has been seeing something that I envisioned a decade ago, and some of the trends slash cultural shifts that were happening at the time actually manifest. I think that it's really fulfilling and sometimes scary to think back because 10 years is not a long time in the grand scheme of things. But to think how much has changed in that amount of time, and how much, in many ways, seeing the future at that time, and now seeing that future come to be, I think is really interesting and also really fulfilling, because you were right. I guess is the first thing. You're like, hey, like I wasn't crazy to think that people cared about this issue, or I wasn't crazy to think that there's a viable business model around conservation and sustainability. And so I think that's been one of the more fulfilling parts, is starting something and seeing it through. Although we're nowhere near done with our journey, we still have a lot to do and a lot to build. Seeing that sort of come full circle, because a lot of times I don't think many people have the patience to see a vision over a decade. And so I think that's been incredibly fulfilling. And even like within that, the sort of smaller examples of seeing some of these supply chains, seeing some of the brands that have come after us also come into being, and find a really a strong customer and demand for what they're doing. I love to see other brands come about and be successful in this space. That's been, I think, also really fulfilling. And now that I've been at it for long enough to see so many brands that, you see a brand that I still think is new, but it might have started 5-6 years ago, and they're doing phenomenal work in something that I would have never seen happening or envisioned happening when I started. And it's neat to see this ecosystem and this community of brands that have come out of all of these consumer demands and these trends that are happening. And I don't think that that's going to go away. I think it's, as you know, the demand for sustainability and notion of leaving the world better than you found it. It's only going to get more important. And I think that the community of brands around it are only going to get stronger, especially if they find ways to continue to support and build community around this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And was it, so from a founder perspective, I think when you go through a 10-year timeline, there are a lot of ups and downs in that process. And I would imagine there's a lot of doubt that kind of comes up when it's like you're going on something that you see is going to happen in the future, and you're like, no, I'm so convicted on this that I'm going after it. I'm going to build this vision and I'm going to make it happen. Was that always something that kind of kept you going, or how did you kind of overcome some of those struggles, I guess, where it's, people are like, oh man, are you sure this is going to work? Oh man, or it's a little bit crazy. Are you sure the world's going to go that way? And you're so convicted about it. Is that part of that process for you?
Yeah, I think so. And I think there is a sense of like naivety in a way as well, that you have to, like, great entrepreneur, and I don't mean naivety in a bad sense. I mean it in a sense that, like, you just sort of drown out everything else, and you're just heads down and focused. And there is an age factor here. I think that the notion of doing what I did for the last, because my journey started with my brand that I had started before this, like back in, 15 years ago. And so ever since 15 years ago, 2006, I've been building my own brand and my own business. And I think that I started when I was 19. And so the naivety of being young and not knowing anything else, I think, created a sort of a tunnel vision that can be very beneficial. It can also be, when you're young, it can also be very harmful and detrimental sometimes when you're a teenager, right? Looking back, you don't know that at the time. But I think if you find that tunnel vision on something that is productive and powerful, I think that age, being young and being a young entrepreneur at the time, and allowed me to focus on it with conviction that I don't think I would have as easy of a time doing now at like 35. Mm-hmm. So I think that's why so many brands and so many things happen when you're younger. And then, not to say that I wouldn't, in fact, I would probably do something a lot more, like I wouldn't make as many mistakes now. But I think that I wouldn't be able to put 10 years or 12 years into something in the same way that I did when I was younger.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think that's a struggle that a lot of founders go through. I mean, I've never really had a job either. I've worked for myself my entire life, and when you do that, yeah, you have to have sort of a sense of, I know what I'm doing, but also that naive side of it of just being like, I'm just going to go with this. I feel convicted about it. Not sure how it's going to turn out. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to take some risks, but I believe in what I'm working on, and it kind of evolves and it changes. And then when you look back on it, you're like, man, why did I do that? But at the same time, that taught you the lesson that now you know how to do it. And I always believe experience is the best teacher. So do you remember your first, quote unquote sustainable purchase that you did make? Was it a product? Was it food? Was it fish?
That's a good question because I feel like sustainable products don't have to be necessarily labeled as such, right? So I think that I don't necessarily have a good idea of that. I think when you're growing up, you're probably buying or participating in a lot of sustainable things and you don't know it, right? Like when I was growing up in Singapore, and I would bike everywhere. I just go bike everywhere. I didn't have a car until I came to the US. Nobody drove in my high school because you take subway, the MRT it's called, but the subway system or buses or bike. And so, looking back, like that was a really sustainable way of living. I wasn't driving to school, like I think a lot of people here do when they're in high school and things like that. And I would yeah, I mean, I think I would always go to the local food courts and eat locally and everything like that. I think there is something sustainable about your life when you're growing up that way. But from a brand standpoint, I don't really know what first sustainable brand I purchased. I mean, I was definitely into the outdoor brands when I was starting United by Blue, although I couldn't really afford them. At that point in my life, the notion of buying anything from like Patagonia, for instance, was a high end.
Yeah, it was Patagucci at the time.
Exactly. It still is in a way. and of course I'm not buying Patagonia now because I'm only wearing United by Blue. But but yeah, no, I can't really say for sure what it is. I think just a combination of things like that.
Nice, nice. And where is your favorite place to enjoy nature?
It's a good question. I think that there is something very special about the wilderness of the US. I think the US is even growing up in Singapore, I had this affinity towards just like the idea and the notion of North American wilderness, like the forests of like if I came to the US to visit family growing up, I was always enamored with how wild this country is, despite it being, 300 and some odd million people, outside of the dense urban centers, which even are not as dense as like Asian urban centers. Um, it's just very wild. And so like living in Philadelphia and spending a lot of time, say, you go 2 hours outside of Philadelphia into the Poconos or the Catskills up in New York and things like that. I mean, you're 2 hours outside of New York City, the largest population center in the US, and the East Coast is very quote unquote dense for the US, but it's wild. And like there's bears, there's deer, there's, I mean, you name it. And so I love spending time in like, for example, the Poconos. Like it's not like the Rocky Mountains or anything like that, but like you get out there and you have tens of thousands of acres of wilderness at your fingertips. And the way that the state park systems work and the national parks and everything like that, there's just so much access to the outdoors in the US that I think it's easy to take it for granted. But it doesn't take much to get really surrounded by nature, even if you live in a city in the US.
Nice. I think that's awesome. I haven't been up there yet. Unfortunately, I've done more of the West Coast side of things, but yeah, I've always kind of wanted to check out that East Coast side, because I've heard it's absolutely stunning in a totally different way.
It is. It's not as dramatic, but it's beautiful and very, very different. Yeah.
That's awesome. So how can people kind of get involved with United by Blue, check you guys out, site, socials, whatever it is? Yeah, if you want to just share that.
Yeah, I mean, the best way to find more about us is our website, unitedbyblue.com, but also, we keep people up to date on Instagram. So go on instagram.com/unitedbyblue. I'd say those are the two best ways. If you're ever in Philadelphia, we have 2 beautiful stores here. We just opened a store in Chicago, and hopefully more to come.
That's awesome. Well, Brian, thank you so much for taking the time. I'm so pumped to be able to talk with you about, kind of your vision. I think you're pioneering the space in a completely different way. And I just think the positioning that you have as a brand and the mission that you guys are supporting, I mean, your impact is just going to keep going through the roof. And I just, grateful for the conversation. So happy that you're able to take the time to do it.
Thanks, Steve. I really appreciate it. Good chatting with you.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Sustainable Goat. I've been shopping from United by Blue for years, and they really are an outstanding solution, especially if you're looking for something more sustainable. Check out their store in the show notes and give them a follow on social media. Through your purchasing decisions, you can not only remove trash from the oceans, but also buy extremely high quality items that you can trust. And if you've been enjoying these episodes, share your favorite one with a friend or post it on social media. Your support goes a long way, and the more the community grows, the more impact that we can have on the world. So thanks again for listening to this episode of Sustainable Goat.